The first time my son looked at me as a man, I saw his father's ghost in his eyes, and I knew I was in danger. Not the kind of danger that sends you screaming into the night, but a quieter, more insidious kind. The kind that slithers into the hollows of your soul, the empty spaces you thought you'd sealed off long ago, and begins to whisper. He stood in the doorway of the decaying Louisiana manor I'd inherited, a silhouette against the oppressive August glare. The air, thick and wet, smelled of jasmine and rot, the signature perfume of the bayou. For 7 years, that smell had been my only constant companion. 7 years since Marcus, his father, had driven his vintage Jaguar off the Causeway Bridge and into the murky depths of Lake Pontchartrain, leaving me with a mountain of debt, a crumbling house, and a son I no longer knew how to reach. Now, that son was home.
Julian had been 17 when he'd left for a prestigious boarding school up north, a scholarship his father had arranged just before his death. I had pushed for it, desperate to get him away from the suffocating influence of this place, of his father's legacy. The visits grew sparse, then stopped altogether. Phone calls became texts, then silence. I told myself it was for the best. Boys need to sever the cord to become men. I just never imagined the man he'd become would look so much like the one who had nearly broken me. At 24, he was no longer the lanky, uncertain boy who'd hugged me goodbye with a kind of desperate guilt. The 7 years had forged him. He was taller, his shoulders broad and powerful beneath a simple black t-shirt. His dark hair, the same untamable cut as his father's, was shorter now, cleaner. But it was his face that held me captive. The jawline was sharper. The mouth, once prone to a nervous smile, was now set in a line of unnerving calm. And his eyes, they were Marcus's eyes, a deep, stormy gray that could conceal a tempest or promise a calm sea. When he'd looked at me then, for that first suspended moment, there was no flicker of the boy I remembered. There was only an unnerving, deliberate appraisal. "Hello, Mother," he said. The word felt alien on his tongue, his voice a low baritone that vibrated in the humid air. It wasn't the cracking tenor of a teenager. It was the measured cadence of a man who chose his words with absolute precision. "Julian." My own voice was a dry rasp. I wanted to move, to rush forward and wrap my arms around him, to reclaim the child I had lost. But my feet were rooted to the warped cypress floorboards, held in place by the sheer force of his presence. He stepped inside, and the cavernous foyer seemed to shrink around him. He didn't just occupy space, he commanded it, just as Marcus had. He set a single duffel bag down, the sound echoing in the unnatural stillness of the house. The air conditioner had died 3 summers ago, and the heat was a living entity, pressing in from all sides. "The place looks—" He paused, his gaze sweeping over the peeling damask wallpaper and the faint water stains mapping the ceiling like forgotten continents. "Exactly the same." "Some things are too stubborn to change," I said, attempting a lightness I didn't feel. His eyes settled back on me, a slow, unnerving smile playing on his lips. "And some things change completely." The first night was an exercise in navigating ghosts. We ate a cold supper of leftover shrimp salad and stale bread on the grand dining table, a relic of a life I'd only ever been adjacent to. The 10 empty chairs surrounding us felt like silent jurors. Julian spoke of his life in Boston, of his studies in architecture, of a world of steel and glass so far removed from the sinking organic decay of this house. He spoke with a dispassionate elegance, detailing his accomplishments without a hint of boastfulness. It was a statement of fact. He had succeeded. He had escaped. I listened, a spectator at the performance of my son's life. I was proud, overwhelmingly so, but a knot of something else, something cold and sharp, tightened in my gut. This man was a stranger, a beautiful, formidable stranger who happened to have my DNA.
As the evening wore on, the conversation dwindled, replaced by the symphony of the swamp outside. The chirping of cicadas, the low bellow of a bullfrog, the distant splash of something unseen moving through the water. He didn't fill the silence. He let it hang, heavy and potent between us. It was a power move, one I recognized intimately from years of watching his father command a room with nothing more than his stillness. "You look tired, Cassandra," he said, his voice cutting through the humid air. He hadn't called me Cassandra since he was a small boy trying to be defiant. Hearing it now from this man felt like a deliberate violation of an unspoken truce. "It's the heat," I lied, dabbing a bead of sweat from my temple. "It drains the life out of you." "Does it?" he mused, leaning back in his chair. The faint light from the tarnished candelabra caught the planes of his face, carving them into a mask of light and shadow. "Or does it just burn away the facades?" I had no answer for that. After he went upstairs to his old room, I remained at the table, the scent of his cologne, sandalwood, and something sharp like gin, lingering in the air. It was a clean, modern scent, nothing like Marcus's heavy, musky oud, and yet it felt just as invasive. I lay awake that night in my massive, lonely bed, the ceiling fan doing little more than circulating the thick, hot air. The house groaned around me, a familiar chorus of settling foundations and warping wood. But tonight, there was a new sound, the steady, rhythmic creak of the floorboards in the room directly above mine, Julian's room. He was pacing. The sound was heavy, deliberate, the footfalls of a man burdened by thought. And with every step he took, I felt a corresponding tremor deep inside me, a shifting of tectonic plates that had been dormant for years. I was no longer alone with my ghosts. I had invited a new one in. The next few days unfolded in a slow, suffocating dance. Julian didn't mention how long he was staying, and I didn't ask. He rose early, and I'd find him in the overgrown gardens, trimming back the wild bougainvillea with a machete he'd found in the shed, his muscles slick with sweat in the morning sun. He moved with a brutal grace that was both fascinating and terrifying to watch. He was taming the chaos his father had left behind, one savage cut at a time. He started fixing things. A shutter that had hung askew for a decade was resecured. A section of crumbling porch lattice was torn out and replaced. He worked with a quiet, focused intensity, never asking for my help, but always aware of my presence. I'd watch him from the kitchen window, my hands submerged in dishwater, feeling like a phantom in my own home. One afternoon, a violent thunderstorm rolled in from the Gulf, turning the sky a bruised purple gray. The rain came down in blinding sheets, lashing against the windows. The power, as it often did, flickered and died, plunging the house into a suffocating gloom. I found myself in Marcus's old study, a room I hadn't entered in years. The air was stale, thick with the scent of old paper, leather, and his lingering ghost. I ran a hand over his mahogany desk, the surface cool beneath my trembling fingers. A wave of panic, cold and sharp, seized me. The walls felt like they were closing in, the air too thick to breathe. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage. I sank into his leather chair, gasping, the darkness of the room mirroring the darkness in my mind. That's when he found me. He didn't turn on a flashlight. He just appeared in the doorway, a darker shadow in the gloom. "Mother?" His voice was soft, stripped of its earlier formality. I couldn't speak. I could only shake my head, a useless, trembling motion. He was beside me in an instant, kneeling on the floor, his large, warm hand covering mine where it rested on the desk. The contact was electric, a jolt of life in the deadening grip of my fear. "Breathe," he commanded, his voice a low, steady anchor in the storm raging inside and out. "Just breathe with me, in and out." I followed his command, my lungs aching as they drew in the stale air. His thumb began to trace slow, soothing circles on the back of my hand. It was an intimacy we had never shared, not even when he was a child. My comfort had always been brisk, practical. His was something else entirely. It was knowing. "It's just a room," I whispered, my voice ragged. "No, it's not," he said, his gaze fixed on my face. "It's a tomb, and you've been living in it for too long." He didn't move away. The storm raged on, and we stayed there, frozen in that strange tableau, the son comforting the mother who was unraveling in his dead father's chair. His hand was still on mine, a brand of warmth and strength. I looked from our joined hands to his face, and in the dim, storm-lit gloom, I saw it again, the ghost of his father. But this time, it wasn't threatening. It was as if Julian had taken the most dangerous parts of Marcus, the confidence, the power, the intensity, and refined them into something else, something protective, something I found myself craving with a desperation that terrified me. The storm broke that night, but the one inside the house had just begun to gather strength. We lit candles, their flickering glow creating an illusion of intimacy that felt both sacred and profane. We didn't speak of what had happened in the study. We didn't have to. It was a new presence in the room, sitting with us at the dinner table, following us into the silent hallways. Later, we sat on the veranda, watching the heat lightning flash silently in the distance. The air was cooler now, washed clean by the rain. "Why did you really come back, Julian?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. He was silent for a long moment, staring out into the darkness where the garden dissolved into the swamp. "There was an offer on the property," he said finally. "A developer. They want to tear it all down, build luxury condos." My heart seized. "And you came to convince me to sell?" He turned to face me, his expression unreadable in the flickering candlelight. "I came to see if there was anything left here worth saving." His eyes weren't on the house. They were on me. My breath hitched. The air between us grew thick again, not with heat, but with a tension so palpable I could taste it, metallic and sharp, like blood. He was closer now, his knee almost touching mine, the scent of him, sandalwood, gin, and the clean smell of rain wrapped around me, pulling me under. "And is there?" I asked, my voice a thread. Instead of answering, he reached out, his fingers gently brushing a stray strand of hair from my cheek. The touch was feather-light, yet it burned a trail across my skin. His gaze dropped to my lips, and I saw a flicker of something in his eyes, a conflict, a hunger, a question. I knew I should pull away. I should stand up, invoke the sacred name of Mother, and retreat to the safety of my room. It was the sane thing to do, the right thing to do. But I was so tired of being sane. I was tired of the silence and the ghosts and the slow, creeping decay. For the first time in 7 years, someone was looking at me not as Marcus's widow, not as a relic of a bygone era, but as a woman of flesh and blood, and a heart that, to my utter shock, was beginning to beat again. When his lips met mine, it was not gentle. It was not a question. It was a claiming, a desperate, hungry collision of two solitary souls who had been orbiting the same tragedy for years. It was the taste of rain and whiskey and a grief so profound it felt like desire. There was no tenderness in it, only a raw, shocking recognition. I answered him with the same desolate urgency, my hands coming up to grip his shirt, holding on as if he were the only solid thing in a world that was dissolving around me. He pulled back, his breath coming in ragged gasps, his forehead resting against mine. We were both trembling. The night was silent, save for the frantic drumming of our own hearts. "I don't know what this is," he rasped, his voice raw. "Neither do I confessed, my eyes still closed. "But it feels like the truth." We didn't go to our separate rooms that night. We stayed on the veranda until the sun began to bleed across the horizon, painting the cypress trees in shades of rose and gold. We didn't speak. We didn't touch again. We just sat in the wreckage of the moment we had created, two survivors on a strange and terrifying shore. The ghost of his father was still there, but it no longer sat between us. It stood behind Julian, a shadow he had finally stepped out of, not by rejecting it, but by absorbing it. The next morning, the world felt dangerously bright, achingly clear. We moved through the house with a quiet, deliberate care, like two people handling unexploded ordnance. Every glance was weighted, every shared silence was filled with the memory of that kiss. The taboo of it all should have filled me with shame, with a deep, sickening guilt, but it didn't. What I felt instead was a terrifying, exhilarating sense of awakening. I had been asleep for 7 years, and my own son, my beautiful, broken son, had been the one to wake me. He found me in the garden, staring at a statue of an angel that had been toppled in the storm. Its marble face was half buried in the mud. "Do you think we're damned?" he asked, his voice even. I looked from the fallen angel to his face, so earnest, so torn. "I think," I said slowly, "we were already damned. This is just the first time we've been honest about it." He stayed for 2 more days. We talked for hours, excavating the past with a careful, surgical precision. We spoke of his father, of the man's charm and his cruelty, of the love and fear he had inspired in both of us. We were the only 2 members of a very exclusive club, the only 2 people on Earth who understood the precise shape of the wound Marcus had left behind. And in that shared understanding, something new and fragile began to grow. It wasn't love, not in any conventional sense. It was something more primal, a recognition, a belonging. The night before he was due to leave, we made love. It was in my room, in the bed I had once shared with his father. It was a slow, deliberate act of exorcism and reclamation. We were not mother and son. We were 2 people, a man and a woman, seeking solace in the one place they knew they could find it, in each other's broken pieces. He left at dawn. We stood in the same doorway where he had arrived, the air between us now charged with a completely different kind of energy. "The developer," I said. "Tell them the property is not for sale." A slow smile touched his lips, the first genuine one I had seen. "I already did." He kissed me, a long, deep kiss that tasted of promises and farewells. "I'll be back," he said. It wasn't a question. It was a statement. I watched him drive away, his car disappearing down the long, oak-lined drive. I stood there for a long time, the morning sun warming my face. I walked back into the house, no longer a tomb, but simply a house. It was quiet, but it was not empty. It was filled with a new, terrifying potential. I didn't know what the future held. I didn't know if our connection was a path to salvation or just a more beautiful form of destruction. But as I stood in the center of the foyer, I felt a profound shift within me. For years, I had been defined by a man's presence, and then by his absence. Now, I was being defined by my own choices. I had stared into the abyss of a great taboo and had not looked away. I had taken the ghost that haunted me and embraced it. This awakening was not born of peace or healing, but of transgression. And in that dangerous, uncertain freedom, I realized the greatest truth of all. Sometimes, the only way to escape a cage is to burn it to the ground, no matter who you have to become to light the match.